Foreword by Michael Parenti. Every year on Oscar night, Hollywood invites the world to join in the illusion that a great industry is serving mankind by creating superb entertainment, bringing us joy and emotional enrichment, romance, sorrow, dazzling action, and hopeful yearnings. Lost in this self-adulatory celebration is the fact that the world of cinema is a rather tightly centralized, profit-driven industry. Like all big corporate industries, less interested in creating an art that nurtures our dreams and more interested in dipping into our pockets. Also easily overlooked is the fact that Hollywood operates within fixed ideological parameters. Along with its endless pursuit of money and fame, the film industry is also a culture industry. The commodities it markets consist of personalities, images, narratives, experiences and ideas of sorts, things that impact directly on public consciousness. So while the prime goal is big profits for the major studios, another goal, whether explicitly acknowledged or not, is ideological control. This latter function is exercised by staying within the boundaries of the dominant belief system, while presenting that belief system as a truthful and natural representation of life. Perhaps then it is more accurate to describe the movie industry as engaged not only in ideological control, but in ideological self-control. Film industry leaders would deny such assertions. They would argue that our society is a cultural democracy whose end product is not ideologically determined, but birthed by the many free choices of a free market. For them, it's Adam Smith's invisible hand reaching from Hollywood and Vine down to Main Street. To make money for its owners, the industry must reach the largest possible markets. That is, it must give the people what they want. Popular culture, therefore, is a product of popular demand, the movie moguls insist. If the cinematic world offers up trashy films, they say, it does so because that's what the public likes. That's what sells. People prefer to be entertained and distracted rather than informed and uplifted. So it is argued, and certainly so it is often true. But is it just a matter of public taste, or is it the power of marketing and distribution that determines the respective audience sizes of various films? Millions of people saw the Rambo sequels, extravagant productions glorifying murderous militaristic heroics. Each of the Rambo films upon release opened in over 2,000 theatres in the United States in the wake of multi-million-dollar publicity campaigns. To give another example, in August 2001, despite appropriately lamentable reviews, Disney unexpectedly decided to extend Pearl Harbor's nationwide release window from the standard 2 to 4 months to a staggering 7 months, meaning that this summer blockbuster would now be screening until December. Enjoying such a massive and saturating distribution, Pearl Harbor could not help but reach large numbers of people. In contrast, only a few thousand people ever saw Salt of the Earth, 1954, a low-budget dramatization of the struggles faced by Mexican-American union workers. This gripping and stirring film, preserved decades later by the Library of Congress and New York's Museum of Modern Art, was subjected to all sorts of coercion in its production and distribution, and managed but a brief run with only 11 small exhibitors. If dissident films like Salt of the Earth fail to reach a mass audience, could it not be because they are kept from mass audiences by the minimal distribution and limited publicity they receive? Lacking huge sums, they must rely on word of mouth and on reviews that are often politically hostile. This is in sharp contrast to the multi-million-dollar publicity campaigns that help create the mass markets for the supposedly more popular movies. If a Rambo film or a film like Pearl Harbor has a natural mass market and is craved by millions of viewers, why is it necessary to spend scores of millions of dollars on publicity hype whose sole purpose is to muster a mass audience? In short, it is not simply a matter of demand creating supply. Often it's the other way around. Supply creates demand. A first and necessary condition for all consumption is availability of the product. Be it movies, television shows, or soft drinks, consumption will depend in large part on distribution and product visibility. A movie that opens in every shopping mall in America wins large audiences not because there is a spontaneous wave of popular demand surging from the base of the social order, but because it is being heavily marketed from the apex. In time, people become conditioned to accepting slick, shallow, mediocre, and politically truncated cinematic presentations. The standardized images and formulaic scenarios become the readily digestible ones. With enough conditioning, consumers will consume even that which does not evoke their great enthusiasm. Hardly ever exposed to anything else, they are all the more inclined to seek diversion in whatever is offered. This argument should not be overstated. The public is not infinitely malleable. Supply does not always create demand. Some Hollywood offerings are dismal flops, despite lavish publicity and energetic distribution. Irrespective of all the talk about giving the public what it wants, industry heads often get it wrong. Audience preferences can be difficult to divine, especially if one's perception of public preferences is itself shaded by one's own socio-political proclivities. Thus, for a period of over 2 decades, spanning the entire 1970s and 1980s, mainstream media pundits and news commentators repeatedly and tirelessly announced that the US public was moving into a conservative mood, the very direction they hoped the public was headed. Network television bosses and the heads of major studios readily took up the cry in what became one of the longest-standing attempts at a self-fulfilling prophecy. Having so decided that the nation was drifting into a conservative mood, they set to work helping to create that drift and that mood. Network brass produced a number of law and order television series like Walking Tall, Strike Force, and Today's FBI around 1981-82. All such offerings were laced with conservative subtext, and all suffered dismal ratings and died early deaths. Something similar happened in the 2000s with series like Threat Matrix in 2003 and 4, She Spies from 2002, and the CIA-sponsored The Agency in 2001. Likewise with the film industry, The Right Stuff from 1983, a film that glorified America's space ventures, was a box office flop. Action films like Cobra from 1986, Rambo 3 from 88, and The Deadpool in 88 did poorly. Given their multi-million-dollar publicity campaigns, these motion pictures had fairly strong opening weekends, but then swiftly flopped after that. Another right-wing war movie, Inchon from 1982, costing $48 million plus another estimated $10 to $20 million for publicity, had everything the public supposedly craves: a star-studded cast, a spectacular production, a love angle, blood-filled battle scenes, super patriotism, a simplistic rewrite of political history, and an empty-headed plot about murderous communist aggressors who are wiped out by a right-wing war hero. Yet Inchon was a box office disaster. This suggests that even a viewing public conditioned to consuming junk sometimes gets tired of consuming the same old junk. In sum, giving people what they want is too simple an explanation of what the film industry does. The major studios foist upon us what they think we want, often promoting films that we never asked for and do not particularly enjoy. But with enough publicity and distribution, even those flops are designed to reach many more people than the financially starved dissident films that are accorded no distribution or mass market publicity to speak of. The image of Hollywood as a den of leftist shills is tirelessly propagated by conservative commentators and publicists. We are told by various right-wing propagandists that the cultural elites of Hollywood and other places like New York, San Francisco and Washington, D.C. propagate values that are dedicated to undermining patriotism and other such American virtues. Such incantations about an elitist leftist agenda are put to rest by the commanding critique offered by author Matthew Alford in the pages ahead. Alford's dissection of Hollywood war films offers an implicit revelation of the misrepresentations of US imperial policy itself and the dominant political myths that sustain it. This book shows in revealing detail how the agencies of the US empire play an active role in the very scripting and production of films about US politico-military ventures abroad. The muted debate about the hidden and not so hidden politics of empire are played out in movie productions themselves, in what gets downplayed, what gets celebrated, and what ends up on the cutting room floor. After an exploration of just about all the significant films of recent years, Alford concludes that while certainly there are prominent liberals in Hollywood, there is no left-wing establishment pursuing an agenda. He also reminds us that there are numerous right-wing stars, censors, and industry professionals actively operating in the film industry. There are national security agencies and Pentagon representatives breathing down the necks of screenwriters, editors, and producers. And most importantly, there are the industry's wealthy and conservative business leaders and bankers who operate within a rigid corporate system. Through an extensive examination of the actual plots, dialogues and characters of scores of mainstream films, Alford not only tells us but shows us that mainstream cinema offers no critique of the fundamental assumptions of US benevolence on the world stage. To the extent that critical remarks are allowed in one film or another, they rest only on very narrow grounds. Heroes confine themselves to rectifying operational blunders, unfortunate mishaps, and individual failings. Instances of excessive military power might be criticised, but not US military power per se, it being assumed that US forces have every right to operate militarily in any chosen trouble spot on the planet. Alford describes films that propagate the notion that war is a regrettable tragedy which resulted from the US blundering idealistically into a situation it did not fully understand and was unable to control. In the world of cinema, US military engagements are always well-intentioned undertakings that sometimes go wrong. Nothing is said about the transnational global interests behind such ventures, about who pays and who benefits from what is transpiring. Such questions would bring us right to the heart of how politico-economic power is wielded in the United States and much of the world. In short, filmmakers, with some notable exceptions, go only so far in their criticisms, knowing in the back of their minds, if nowhere else, that they cannot make a truly radical film. They cannot get to the root, exposing the exploitative interests of global empire or the dangerous and undemocratic nature of the national security state. To attempt as much would invite trouble for the film one is trying to produce and distribute. There would come a loss of funding, a scarcity of viewing outlets, and an endless savaging by mainstream movie reviewers who know for whom they work. About this, we only have to ask Oliver Stone, who endured a relentless pummeling for his attempt in JFK in 1991 to venture into forbidden territory regarding the Kennedy assassination. So it can be said that we are being more than entertained. Mainstream filmmakers have a built-in capacity to handle burning issues in ways that mute their impact and reduce their meaning. Oppositional realities are incorporated into the script, but in a pre-digested form. Official injustice and corruption became the doings of a few bad apples or rogue elements. War becomes little more than a tough, bitter experience for the American soldiers involved. As Alford puts it, it is standard practice in Hollywood, as it is among US elites in the real-life political realm, to assume that foreigners don't matter, US enemies are implacably villainous, and US power is by definition selfless and good. In the celluloid world, political leaders face hard choices about integrity and fair play, but rarely take a stand on real economic issues. Resistance to injustice is expressed through gutsy individual defiance. One man and one man alone stood up to the threat of... Through its cinematic alchemy, Hollywood produces films that might appear topical and socially relevant without having to deal with the actual dimensions of social conflict, fighting terrorism without ever getting too close to reality. If all of this is true, if movies are implicitly conservative in their supportive representations of the US national security state and of America's imperial reach and presumed moral superiority, then why do conservatives complain about a leftist liberal bias in Hollywood? It's the same complaint they make of the ever-compromising, ever-timid, right-leaning US news media, and for much the same reasons. Movies repeatedly confine their critical attention to a narrow and superficial sphere and rarely proffer a truly radical critique. But even this limited application is seen as a liberal denigration of the US politico-economic system and its global imperium. Showing a US soldier ruthlessly killing one innocent civilian in what is otherwise presented as a noble military venture against terrorism is more than the right-wing ideologues can countenance. Anything critical, however diluted, incidental, and innocuously decontextualized, will still be found offensive by the uncompromising reactionaries. Furthermore, in certain cultural ways, Hollywood actually has been subversive with its sexually explicit scenes, verbal profanity, tolerance of deviant lifestyles, including homosexuality, and its supposed disregard for family values. For reactionaries, such seemingly decadent proclivities are seized upon as proof that the film industry rests in the hands of America's empires. For reactionaries, such seemingly decadent proclivities are seized upon as proof that the film industry rests in the hands of America's enemies. Depicting Hollywood as ridden with leftists also is a way of continually exerting the kind of pressure that helps shift the centre of political gravity rightward, keeping the industry off balance, obliging it to demonstrate its patriotic bona fides. So the film industry constantly dresses up for the right while never daring to move too decisively to the left on any fundamental issue. Much of the process of ideological control is carried out implicitly. Alford reminds us that people working within power systems are not always fully able to recognise the ideological boundaries set by state and corporate forces within which they work. And if they did raise troublesome views about the dangers of undemocratic and plutocratic power, he adds, this would seriously jeopardise their careers. We might remember that the most repressive forms of social control are not always those we consciously rail against, but those that so insinuate themselves into the fabric of our consciousness as to remain unchallenged, having been embraced as part of the nature of things. There no doubt are liberals and progressives in Hollywood who themselves remain unaware of how their efforts serve the powers that be. Alford ends this book with a plea that we should all heed, a call for a freer, less concentrated system of ownership and production in which filmmakers would create imaginative and compelling narratives and be less afraid to interrogate the corporate roots of US power. In short, to make better films, and therefore Oscar nights, that serve democracy instead of plutocracy. Chapter 1. Hollywood Screened. Conventional wisdom holds that Hollywood has long opposed and undermined US power. From its inception in the early 20th century, the LA-based movie industry was viewed with suspicion by European and American elites who saw it as a degraded Jewish influence, undermining traditional values with minority views. In the 1950s, conservative concerns about communists in Hollywood became so severe that the US embarked on a